All right, so far, you've come to a parenting group, and all we've talked about are parents. We've talked about our attachment styles, we've talked about our brains, our bodies, our nervous systems, how we as adults interact with the world around us based on our history, based on our past, based on our biology and our brains, and everything kind of about us. We are taking a step in a different direction tonight. We are moving to the section on children. So what we're going to look at tonight is parenting for better brain development. So ways we can parent our kids to help them grow in ways that are helpful to them. And we're also going to look at some brain and attachment focused interventions. So we're going to dig a little bit more into what's going on in the world of the child. And then we're going to take a look at some things we can do based on the child's developmental level and based on what they need in order to get the best traction from our interventions with our kids. Because remember, the first week we talked about this whole thing about parenting is really about discipline, but discipline in terms of discipleship, like training our children, letting them be the ones that sit at our feet so that they can learn the things that they need to be able to become the people that we want them to become. And the best possible scenario of this happening is that we help our kids learn. Sometimes we have to take off some of the rough edges. Sometimes we have to teach them things that they're not so good at. But we're doing that in a way that builds relationship with our kids. And my goal is that we're able to teach, help our kids grow, intervene when we need to, but still have a great relationship with our kids so that by the time they're adults, they still want to come over to our house for dinner. You know, they still want to interact with their mom and dad, and they become the people that we're proud of at the same time. So tonight is going to be a deep dive into what's really going on inside the world of the child. So the first question is really just thinking about, do you ever wonder what's going on inside the world of a child? Your kids ever do stuff that just make you scratch your head and like, what on earth were they doing? What were they thinking? You ever find stuff in your house and you're thinking, why on earth did this happen? What is going on here? Or you give a pretty simple direction, or what you feel like is a pretty simple direction, and you just get nothing. Or you get even the opposite. So trying to make sense of things that don't always make sense is really kind of the name of the game tonight. So what we're looking at is, can we figure anything out that we don't know yet about what's going on in the world of the child? So to start off, I've got 3 stories that I'm going to tell you about 3 different kids in 3 really different stages of life in 3 really different situations. So the first one is called the Preschool Playdate Icecream Meltdown. So it's the very first day of summer after Timmy's first year in preschool. All the preschool parents have had an amazing year of bonding and decide to kick off the summer with an epic playdate at the park. The parents planned on spending some real adult time to catch up with the other adults. With each other, while the children would be magically mesmerized by the playground equipment at the park. As it always happens, right? As the adults attempt to dive deep into adult conversation for the first time in weeks, their in-depth conversations are sidetracked one by one by Timmy and his friends as they perform their feats of bravery and courage on the various playground toys. Mommy, look at me go down this slide. Daddy, come watch me. I can swing so high. Mommy, you got to see this bug that I found. And after about a half an hour of near constant interruptions, the melodious sound of an ice cream truck bellow across the playground field. Timmy's mom decides to purchase some precious time for the parent group by springing for ice cream for the whole preschool cohort. She gives Timmy a 20 and told him to go buy ice cream for him and all of his friends. Finally, a little break, she laughs to the other parents. With the children finally pacified with sweet treats, the parents can get back to their bliss of adult time. Just as the conversations start to switch back into adult mode, Timmy comes running down the hill to show his mother the coolest ice cream he's ever seen. And he trips and falls, spilling the treat on the grass right at his mother's feet. Completely undone, Timmy begins to convulse and sobs, lamenting the untimely demise of his sugary treasure. Yeah. So what would be a common response to this? Pick it up and eat it, right? 3-second rule. Yeah. So a common response might be that the parent is feeling a little frustrated, might even be out of their green zone at this point. Went through all this trouble, all this hassle to do something fun for who? For Timmy and his friends, right? But also kind of to get that adult time. And so mom's plans are kind of getting sidelined here. So a common response might be that the parent might feel some embarrassment, might feel some disappointment, might feel like all eyes are now on her. What are you going to do about this? Your kid that you just gave money for the ice cream is now crying at your feet. Anyone ever felt that heat start to rise as you're thinking, okay, now everyone's looking, what am I going to do next here? So that's the first one. The second one is titled The Middle School Anti-Screentime Conspiracy. So Susie has been working hard all year on her time management skills in order to balance the much-needed social screen time with the all-too-necessary middle school homework requirements. She worked with her mom and dad much of the year to figure out plans and strategies to find that delicate balance between academic demands and the social demands of middle school. Finally, the end of the year came, none too soon, leaving Susie with a deep sense of accomplishment, lots of new friends, and passing grades to boot. Susie's mom and dad have been feeling pretty accomplished and have been celebrating the peace and calm resting on their home during the final weeks of school. On the first day of summer, Susie's dad popped home during lunchtime to retrieve his laptop for an important work meeting. Susie met him at the driveway, eyes filled with tears, exclaiming, "It's not fair!" Apparently, all of Susie's friends get as much screen time as they want during the summertime, and she's stuck with all these unfair limits of 2 hours per day. That's Susie. What's a common response to this dilemma here? What might a parent of a middle schooler feel? What's that? You can tell them they can have less. All right, now we're talking. We're going to jump right into some consequences here, right? You think life's bad now? Yeah. Let's see how bad it can get. That's a common response, isn't it? We feel it, for sure. So the last one is Rage Against the Curfew. So this one's about Mike. Mike is navigating the treacherous waters of his 10th grade year in high school. He's been making friends this year in a way that's both new and exciting for him. He's connected with an eclectic, fun, new group of peers who often like to organize game and movie nights with each other on the weekends. Most of his friends live within biking range from the house, and Mike often bikes to spend time with his new group of boys and girls. His parents are excited for Mike to spread his wings, but also feel the need to set some reasonable parental limits for him. They decide 11 p.m. was more than generous curfew for Mike, which has worked most of the time. On this particular night, Mike has broken curfew. His parents are really beginning to worry and beginning to escalate out of the green zone and into the red. He came storming in the door at 11:45, eyes puffy, and darts towards his room, where he crumples into the floor, face and hands on the floor. What might be a typical response to Mike at that point?
Are you okay?
Okay, yeah, you might do some check-in. You might notice that something's not quite right here, right? You're in trouble might be a common response also. Because again, we've been seething for the last 45 minutes. Worried. Yeah, where have you been? What have you been doing? Those are some common responses. So what I'm going to propose tonight is that each of these stories are explainable and understandable. We're going to look into the world of the child tonight and try to see if we had a little bit more information, if we had a little bit more understanding of what might be going on in this kiddo's world, could there be a way we could go beyond our typical responses? And the typical responses are fine. They're understandable, they're justified, they're normal. But can we go to a place of deeper insight as parents? Can we up our game a notch and look a little bit more into what the needs might be for kids in these different stages here? So as a reminder, in all of these stories, back to our Stott model here, what we've done is we've given an expectation in all of these. Go play with your friends. You've got 2 hours of screen time. Be home by 11. That's an example of us giving an expectation for our children. And as long as those are met, fantastic, great, no problem. But in all of these situations, we have expectations that were not met. At each of those points, for each of those parents, we start to feel that dip in our self-value. We might feel disrespected, we might feel unloved, we might feel out of control, we might feel that we're not connected well with our kids just because of the behaviors that are going on there. And when that happens, that's when we're primed for an emotional response. Justified emotional response. These feelings are real. They come from somewhere. And if we get to the point where we go to that flipped lid and our thought process is something along the lines of this: what a brat, nobody treats me this way, then we're likely to go to either a red zone or a blue zone with our kids. We might get really big and loud and forceful, or we might just kind of cut off connection with our kids. Except tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to work on being grounded in some understanding. We talked last week about getting to that grounding episode. What can we do that grounds us in the here and now, helps us to become calm, helps us to be able to respond better to our kids? And we're going to focus in a big, big way on this curiosity part here. The what is going on in the world of this kid. And if we've got nothing there, if we're left with like this place of mystery where it's like we have no idea why they're doing what they're doing, then we're going to have some frustration, right? But if we can even put some sort of label, some sort of explanation on why this might be going on, we're going to be in a better place. So the curiosity step in the Stott model is really to stop and think about, number one, what's going on for us. Why do I feel frustrated? Is this my shark music? Is this something from my past? Is this something that's particularly triggering to me? So we get curious with ourselves, and this is even giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt, saying, yeah, it's okay to feel frustrated. These are frustrating situations and frustrating times. It's okay to feel what you feel, but can we go a little deeper with it? Can we get back to our place of security and back to our place of self-value? And once we do that, then we're going to look into what's up with our kid. So if we can give some explanation, give some benefit of the doubt to ourselves, wouldn't this be a great place to give the benefit of the doubt to our children as well? And if we're able to do that, if we've got something in our box, our little go-to box, our curiosity box, what's going on in there, it's very possible that we will have a better intervention. Meaning we'll be able to change this behavior better if we understand it. Also, we're more likely to get better results. When we're intervening, when we're trying to change and teach our children, we're more likely to get better results if we understand what's going on in their world. And ultimately, what this is going to lead to is better relationship. If you come to your child from a place of empathy, understanding, and compassion, that's the kind of authority kids need. That's the kind of authority kids will listen to and will grow from and want to learn from. So tonight, what we're going to look at is what do we do with that curiosity? what are the things that might be going on that might be leading to some of these behaviors that make us feel like we want to pull our hair out sometimes. And we want to look at things like the brain. Is it brain stuff going on for our kids? Can we explain these behaviors in terms of what's happening in their brains, and what are they capable of and what are they not capable of? Even some really tried and true consequences, like around taking something away that is valuable to a kid. Developmentally speaking, that's going to work better or worse depending on a kid's concept of time, depending on how they understand object permanence, meaning it's here and it's not here and it's here again. So just some of the brain development can really inform what we're doing there. So we're going to look at the brain. We're also going to look again, we're going to revisit attachment and say, could some of this stuff that's going on have to do with my kid's attachment style? Now, for those of you who are raising your own children who you brought into this world, and you have a pretty good idea of what their attachment style is and where it came from, this can still be really helpful. So you might recognize some things that they're doing that may be some things that you do. And you can kind of draw the lines sometimes and say, oh, I get why they're keeping me at arm's length right now. I do that too sometimes. Or attention seeking or hovering or any of those sorts of things. We're going to look at attachment. Also, developmental level. We're going to look at some things that are typical in terms of stages of development, what's normative, and especially with the teen brain. So those of you with tweens and teens, there's going to be some really huge insight tonight. And if you don't have teens or tweens yet, hopefully you will at some day. Meaning your kids will stay with you that long. But you'll have some things to kind of keep in your back pocket, some things to keep in mind as your kids get older that are pretty normal sorts of things. Trauma we're going to look at next week, but I just threw that up there also because that's one other explanation of why kids do the things that they do sometimes. Sometimes when hard life things have happened, it impacts the way people think and the things that they do. And having a good understanding of what that looks like is something that we're going to do a lot next week. So quick review. Upstairs brain, cerebral cortex. This is our thinking brain, right? All of us have these, more or less. Our children, what do you think? More or less? Good guess. We're gonna watch a video here in a minute that talks about this, but the frontal lobe, the thinking, the upstairs part of our brain doesn't really get fully online until age like 25, and some even say later than that. 25, 26, some even say 30. But the idea is that this is still under construction for our kiddos. So asking kids to do things that involve a whole lot of those higher level critical thinking skills when their brains are still developing can be challenging. Now, downstairs brain, all of us have those, and the deal is we're all born with those. We are born with our downstairs brain online, ready to function. So for kiddos, think about this math here. Think about the equation. Less upstairs means more downstairs, right? So less ability to think clearly, think ahead, think rationally, think logically, and more ability to what? Feel, kick and scream, fight or flight. It is much more likely that our kids are going to flip their lids when they're in stressful situations just because of how the brain develops and how it develops over time. Now, our basement brain, those are all good for everybody, and that's a good thing because that means that we sleep, we wake up, we breathe, our hearts are beating, and those sorts of things. So that's all good for all of us. Interesting about left brain and right brain too. Now, when you're born, your right brain is already online. So your feeling, your connection, your attachment, your images, your big picture, it's all ready to roll. You're born ready to connect and have feelings and express those feelings without words. This is why we don't have words when we're born. We have to use the best that we have, which is sometimes kicking, screaming, crying, biting, all of those things that live in the right brain. So it's like a plug-and-play device, right? You're born with your right brain plug-and-play. Like those devices, you get it home, pull it out of the box, and it's ready to roll right off the bat. Our left brain is like a computer that has no software on it at all. It's a fabulous machine, but you have to put some software into it to make it work. So this is why when we're born, our left brain it's like a pre-formatted computer ready for you to write stuff down, and it's taking down information all the time. So language lives in your left hemisphere. That's why when you're born, you can't talk. You have to lay that stuff down. And the more interaction you have, the more software you're putting into the left brain. So even things like logic, if-then statements. If this happens, then this happens next. Surprise, surprise, we're not born with this. This is something that we develop over time. This is something when we see things happen, our brains love to notice those patterns, and they start putting the bits of logic together from the moment that you're born. When I cry, that really nice smelling lady comes and gives me milk. And that's a good thing. If then, if I cry, then this happens next. And then you start building logic upon that. Wow, that lady looks the same every time she comes to give me milk. Oh, wait a minute, maybe that's the same person every time. And her voice and her smell and her touch and all of those things are there, and you're just laying down logic time and time again. This is why kids will sometimes do things that are pretty illogical, especially the younger they are. They're still figuring that stuff out. That's why fantasy play is fantastic for like our toddlers, preschoolers, because things can still be magical, right? You haven't had your heart crushed with the reality that superheroes aren't really real anymore, and that your dad isn't one of them, and that that the world just doesn't quite work that way. So there's some really beautiful parts of having kind of an illogical brain, but there's also some parts of it that can be a little challenging for us as well. So be curious. When you see something weird going on with your kid, that should be the first thing. Is this a brain thing? Are they still kind of growing some brain architecture here that we need to work on? The next thing is being curious about the attachment, like I mentioned here. So I'm going to give you really quickly just some ways to recognize attachment styles in kiddos. And this is all about going to the place of safety for kids, because you're much bigger than they are, and you have the control most of the time. So this is kind of what do they do when they need something, when they feel stressed, when they feel like they're out of control or the world is not going the way they would like for it to. Secure children will turn towards a caregiver. Their whole idea, the whole thing, the way they walk in the world is that they want to maximize closeness with the people that they're close to. They know that they will be attended to, but it's also okay to be independent. They can go and play with their friends, but they know that they can come back as well. So secure children will maximize that safety by going towards you in relationship. Avoidant children will keep safe by distancing themselves. So they might want to protect themselves by avoiding the opportunity to be rejected. Being rejected does not feel good. As a matter of fact, Dan Siegel, in one of his most recent books, talks about what happens in the brain when you feel social rejection. It lights up the same part of the brain as if you were being physically assaulted. He said even stabbed. So when a person is stabbed or assaulted, it lights up the same part of the brain that social rejection feels. So you can understand if you've felt a lot of social rejection and you've been stabbed all of those times, it makes sense why you want to stay away from that pain, right? Same thing with their kids. If they've experienced a lot of rejection, they might try to preserve their felt safety, preserve their sense of safety and security by staying a little distant from their caregivers. So just recognizing it, wow, this may be about, so that then you don't have to necessarily take it personally. It's like this is just how they're trying to stay safe. An anxious child has learned that they will seek protection by seeking attention. It's not okay to not be seen, to not be heard. So they will make every effort possible to be seen or to be heard. Because if you're not seen and you're not heard, you might not be safe. So this is how kiddos try to stay safe. And then our disorganized and fearful kiddos, they may try to protect themselves by seeking attention from you, coming close, but then life has taught them that being close is not safe either, so then they will retreat back away from relationship as well. So you get kind of this push and pull dance that happens with kids. Most of the time, these are kids who've experienced some significant levels of trauma in their life, one way or another, or they've experienced some loss, or they've experienced some rejection in some very, very significant ways. So that's how they try to stay safe. And I just threw this on here also. Be curious about the roots and the branches. If you see some behavioral branches up there, think about prenatal development also. If you know that there's been things that have happened to your child before he or she was born, those can have really long-lasting impacts. Some of this is around like drug and alcohol exposure. If you know those things have happened, you can kind of count on some of those relational things being a little difficult sometimes. Learning disabilities, focus, attention, ability to connect and attach. So if you know that about your child, that gives you an extra level of empathy and understanding for them. Also, even stressful pregnancies sometimes. If you've had stress all throughout the pregnancy and baby gets all that cortisol, they're born into the world with a heightened level of cortisol, or sometimes even depleted, and they can be kind of hard to soothe and difficult to tend to. So thinking about what might be going on for the kiddos. All right, so now we're going to move into some videos around development. We're going to start kind of in the first moments of life here, and we're going to move up into the teenage years. So these are kind of some of the things that the experts have to say about development. So I'm encouraging you, be curious about your child, be curious about the developing child. Okay, so this first one is about relationship and brain development. So how much relationship plays into the formation of your child's brain. And it's going to focus on this concept called serve and return. So as you're watching this, see if you can figure out what this whole serve and return idea is all about.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
So what do you think? Serve and return. Well, can anyone give an example of a serve? So they say serve and return. Think about it like tennis, right? If you serve, your child's like giving a serve, you're returning the ball. That's the return part of it. So what are some ways, even starting out as infants, how do kids serve? How do they give us bids for attention? Cry? Perfect. Yeah. Every time they're doing that, every time they cry, that's a serve. And when you attend to that cry, that's a return. You've built some brain structure. What else? What are some other things kids do as a serve? Yes?
So there was like food or sleep signals that maybe she slips out or something.
Sure.
Oh, you need food.
Excellent. Yeah, if you recognize that they need something, facial movements, any of those sorts of things, that's a serve. And when you pick up on that and say, oh, I think they need some food, there's the return, right? Great. What else?
Voices?
What's that?
Voices.
Voices?
Voices.
Yeah, so giving some vocalization, some babbling, some cooing, those sorts of things, even calling out. And this doesn't stop in infancy. That's kind of the cool thing. A serve and return thing is kind of the basis of attachment lifelong. Yeah.
Another one might be like if your kid does something you like, he's a 2-year-old, he says thank you. It's like, yes.
Yes.
Without saying thank you.
All right. Fantastic. So there's a serve. Thank you. And then you give that smile and you recognize, awesome. That's a return. Awesome. Think about even older kids, even out of infancy, toddlers, preschoolers. What are some bids for attention that we might see from kids that age? Tantrums are a great form of communication, right? That is a serve. That's saying something is overwhelming me to the point that this is the best possible option of what I have to do right now. It's not a great option, but they're letting you know something's not right in my world, and I need you to come help me figure this out and get this thing back on track. Yeah, for sure, tantrums. What else? The other ways kids give bids for attention.
Showing you things or holding things out to you.
Awesome. Every time your kid comes up to show you something, and you give them that awesome mom smile and that beam with pride, man, take time to do that. If they've got something that they want to show you, because every time you do that, think about this is strengthening my child's brain. This is giving them the things that they need to be able to build logic, to be able to build the things that will help them with relationships all throughout their lives. So every time that they are able to express a need to you for attention and you respond, that's serve and return. It can be as basic as crying and as complex as some of our middle schoolers and the things that they do to get our attention sometimes, but in everything in between. So I want to show you this next video about what happens and why it's so important that we do this serve and return thing. Because when it's there and it's happening, and the more you can do it, the better. We can't always do it, but as much as we can do it, give those returns to the serves, it's going to go well by our kids. But we're going to see what happens when it's missing, just how important this stuff is.
Everyone in a community has a vested interest in everyone else's children, because everyone else's children determine the next adult population that makes for a successful society. Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development, certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
Science points to 4 categories of this spectrum of neglect. The first category would be what's called occasional inattention, where children experience responsiveness most of the time, but occasionally adults don't respond. There's no harm in that, and in fact, there's probably some benefit.
A child can learn to self-soothe and explore the environment, and all of those opportunities build brain architecture.
The second category, scientists would call chronic understimulation, is where on a regular basis, children have less interaction with the adults around them than is needed for healthy development.
Those children typically, when provided with enriched learning opportunities and more typical levels of serve and return, will show catch-up.
The third category is what science would call severe neglect in a family where not only are there prolonged periods of inattention and lack of responsiveness, but often also associated with not being fed enough, not being bathed enough, not having basic needs met.
Neglect is a huge problem in the U.S. Children are much more likely to be neglected than they are to experience any other kind of maltreatment.
We see the child really being at risk for much more substantial kinds of deficits down the road that don't necessarily get easily fixed or ameliorated. This is where we really need to think about more complicated and often more intensive strategies to help undo those effects.
The fourth category, called severe neglect, generally found in institutional settings, is the result of children living in kind of warehoused type situation in orphanages.
And it doesn't have to even be as extreme as orphanages. It can be experiences that are regretfully occurring in many, many parts of our country.
Often institutional care in this country is under the euphemistic name of transitional care or temporary care or assessment facilities.
If you think about what institutional or residential care would look like for an infant, where there's somebody new coming onto the shift every 8 hours, it really alters the development of the child's brain architecture and other aspects of the child's development.
We have the potential to change children's developmental trajectories.
Interventions can apply to parents, to foster parents or adoptive parents, child care settings, Head Start settings, and other kinds of settings. And really, what they're about is attuning people to the serve and return process.
Neglecting young children is neglecting the foundations of a healthy next generation. The community pays a huge price later in terms of the problems of the next generation, whether it be educational achievement, economic productivity, good citizenship, the ability to parent the next generation. All of the things that have to do with a healthy, prosperous society.
Any thoughts about that one? You can jump to your mind.
It really makes me think about how distracted we are on cell phones all the time.
Sure.
I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I find it really easy to just be on the phone. And I'm thinking culturally, how many of us are in that, constantly attached to our phones.
Yeah.
What that's doing to our ability to respond.
That's a really great point. I don't know if everyone heard that, the impact of being on our phones and how that might short circuit that serve and return. And as a matter of fact, this kind of constant on my phone scrolling thing, that's subtle or maybe not so subtle message that's sending is what's important here. And more importantly, what does a little one have to do to get your attention if this is what they see? You know, I'm not trying to say this from a place of judgment, because I'm guilty as well. It's so attractive and it's so difficult sometimes to pull ourselves away. But having that knowledge that, wow, we might inadvertently be teaching our kids some anxious attachment, that I have to be louder, I have to do more to get your attention, I have to keep upping the ante in order for you to hear me, unintentionally, right? So just being mindful, being present. And I would recommend anytime they're coming towards you, and to, especially if your attention, to show you something great, to set it down. Someone was even, I think it was Aaron or someone was telling me about the, even someone seeing your cell phone present can send a signal that your attention might already be divided, and that you're waiting for that next thing, that next buzz, the next text or snap or whatever, yeah.
I was a little bit confused by what they were saying about occasional attention,
Mm-hmm.
attention sometimes being healthy.
Yes.
What's the context for that?
Good. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you caught that. Because that's important. Occasional inattention means not all the time, but sometimes kids have periods of time where they have to entertain themselves. And that if as long as it's, in small doses and it's moderated and there's other moments of serve and return, they said that that's not always entirely unhealthy. That it gives kids an opportunity to learn, to entertain themselves, to develop kind of some of that internal dialogue, that inner world, to learn to be creative and inquisitive within themselves. So a little bit, because we can't give 100% attention all the time. We just can't. So I like that they put that in there, that it's not, when you are a human being and you've got other things happening and your kids do need to entertain themselves from time to time, that's an okay thing, and that's a little bit healthy. But then it kind of hits that line when it's like that chronic understimulation. That means that they're understimulated a lot throughout the day, a lot of the time, that can be difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it interesting that is on the spectrum of neglect,
Mm-hmm.
because neglect I see as a bad thing,
Mhm.
whereas sometimes you have to ignore negative behaviors when they're seeking,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
your attention in a negative way.
Sure.
So
Mm-hmm.
why is that on the spectrum?
I think it's just on there because it's a way kids are not getting attention, and he's saying that not all of them are inherently bad or have evil intent to them, but it does happen sometimes. Yeah. Yes.
Well, cry it out thing,
Mhm.
there's been a lot of a tradition, I feel like, since maybe Victorian era.
Yeah.
That we seen and not heard,
Mhm.
kind of comes out of that, like, we need to propagate the species, but we don't want to be bothered by
Yes.
development.
Mhm.
And I wonder, because I have a lot of people in generations before me advise, just let them try. I did it one time for 45 minutes when I was a 7-year-old, and I did not
Sure.
ever return.
Mhm.
But it makes me wonder, they talk about it affecting that generation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, how much we're seeing now from those going before, it's just,
Sure.
I wonder where that falls on.
I'll say two things about that. One is given what I'm seeing from the folks at the Harvard study on the developing child, that seems, and I don't want to come at this from a place of judgment, because I was told this myself and was under that philosophy, and kind of what they're finding though is that for appropriate brain development, that serve and return is so vital. It's really, really important. So I think this is bucking that trend a little bit, and it just seems like that's the direction that it's heading in, is that connection and attention, serve and return is maybe more important than us getting a good night's sleep sometimes. However, occasional, and if in limited doses, if they can kind of self-soothe and drift off to sleep on their own a little bit, then I would say that's probably okay as well. Limited amounts. The second thing I want to say, which is what I love about these folks as well, is the hope that they instill. It's not just that they're saying, hey, we've ruined all of our kids, oh great, what a terrible world we're going to have now. It's, the serve and return, the lack of serve and return can get us into some bad spots. But what can get us out of bad spots? Serve and return, right? The same thing that's if it's missing at one point in life, and they're talking about throughout the lifespan. If we're able to give appropriate attention, and maybe we've made some mistakes, and maybe we were taught things by well-meaning people at certain points in our lives that we tried, and maybe we did some things that might have caused things to be a little bumpy for our kids. That's reversible, right? And that's what this is all about: new insight, new ways of doing things, so that we can maybe do things better from here on forward. Excellent questions. All right, we're going to move on from serve and return to one of the next really important phases of development in the brain, and it's about executive functioning skills. Has anyone heard of executive functioning skills? A lot of research on it right now. They're basically skills around, well, it's on your handouts there, but being goal-oriented, planning, prioritizing, reflection, flexibility, and organizing. These are like the staying focused skills, and being able to follow through, being able to complete a task when asked to do it, being able to recognize social cues. All of those things that help us be able to interact well with the world around us. And a lot of us kind of feel like, we're just born and we know how to pay attention and focus. And what they're finding is this is a skill that develops over time. So we're going to watch a little video here from the same folks that talk about what these skills are, why they're so important, and some ways that we can kind of help facilitate these skills as they grow.
Science tells us that minds are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Just look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Safety goggles.
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
6, 7, 7, and plus 4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match prime.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're hoping to strengthen those neural connections.
You're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
There we go. Activity 7, page 13. That's just a little thing. You might just look at a few of those. Are there any things on there that you could do with your kids to help them develop some executive functioning skills? And the most important thing, I think, with this is to put some words on it and to recognize it. What can really look like someone just being very disrespectful might be that there's some parts of development that haven't happened yet. The ability to control impulses, the ability to focus, pay attention, take turns, stop one thing, start another thing, that can be really, really challenging for some kids. And if we feel like it's just them out to get us or disrespecting us, we're going to interact with them as if that were the case. If we recognize, wow, this is a skill my kid has not learned yet, then we get to be back in that role of teacher, mentor, guide for our children to help them see how it's done. How do we do this thing? And for some kids, and this is like for typically developing kids, but for some kids and even some adults, some of these skills are still lacking. And that can be, again, that can look like disrespect, lazy, just doesn't care. But sometimes it is a matter of lagging skills in some of those executive functioning areas. All right, let's talk about teens. So if I say the word teenager, what are some of the first words that come to mind? Angst. What was that? Challenge. Okay. Challenge. Angst. Hormones. Someone said the H word. Yep. What else? Sleeping. Rebellious. Great. Wild. We've all been there, right? Some of us longer ago than others, but we've all been there, right? And for some of us, coming back around to that with our kids, sometimes we forget just how much is going on. Just like with the executive skills, we forget how hard it is to do the work of growing up and being a kid. Learning how to take turns, learning how to do social skills, learning how to finish what you start. then you amp that up even further into, okay, I'm not quite a kid, I'm not quite an adult, and there's a lot happening in my brain, in my body right now. So we're going to watch this video that hopefully will demystify it. I think every single word that someone said during this time is going to be addressed in one way or another during this video here.
Being a teenager is hard, and so is living with one, I'm told. No human gets to escape this moody, angsty, confusing phase, and interestingly, such an extended adolescence is unique to humans. Other animals grow up a lot faster than we do. And you may think our teen years are just about streamlining bodies for baby making, but as it turns out, the storms of sex hormones that we associate with the teenage years are only a small part of what's really going on in the teenage body. Most of the action, it turns out, is happening in the brain. Until fairly recently, we thought that the brain finished the nuts and bolts of its development by the time we started kindergarten. But really, right as puberty rolls in, it undergoes massive remodeling. This amounts to several years of neural growing pains, as well as the other more visible growth that's going on all over your body. So take heart, whether you're going through it now, or about to go through it, or count yourself among the veterans of that turbulent decade. Know that the result of the teen years is a stronger, faster, more sophisticated brain. Someone had told me that 20 years ago. Let's start with that obvious scapegoat of adolescent anguish, hormones. That word itself is kind of a lazy shorthand that people use to describe the chemicals that some of our glands excrete that can affect our behavior. But the fact is, hormones have all kinds of jobs that have nothing to do with where you grow hair, or what turns you on, or whether you feel glum for no apparent reason. Hormones keep your heart beating and your body hydrated, and they make your organs grow and make you grow bone and muscle and skin. What people actually mean when they talk about teenage hormones are sex hormones. And yes, puberty involves a whole series of sex hormone storms, the first of which actually kicks in before you're out of primary school. That's when the adrenal glands start secreting androgens, which trigger the growth and activity of the skin's sebaceous glands, making skin more oily. Soon enough, more apocrine or sweat glands get activated, increasing body odor. Then comes the wave of hormonal agents that start activating the gonads. For boys, this influx of luteinizing hormones from the pituitary gland get testosterone brewing in the testes, and suddenly, that guy has up to 50 times more testosterone than he did before puberty. This also changes the shape of the male body, promoting hair growth and building up lean muscle mass, just as the increased presence of estrogen in girls rearranges the deposition of their fat, stimulating the growth of breasts. Humans are actually lucky to experience the craziness of puberty only once. Many other animals undergo multiple similarly intense hormonal rodeos as they enter sexually active periods, sometimes called the rut or heat, every new breeding season. Some male species completely stop eating during their breeding period because they're just that sex crazed. And yet, all that said, teens are far less ruled than their hormones than you might think. There are other factors at play here. For example, your favorite moody teen may be by turns punchy, angry, depressed, or in a zombie-like fog because of their chronic lack of sleep. Sleep is vital to everyone, but it's especially important for kids and teens because it's during sleep that your pituitary gland releases an essential growth hormone necessary for development. A normal sleep cycle driven by circadian rhythm is regulated by the daytime release of cortisol, which helps you wake up, and melatonin, which helps you wind down when it gets dark. But this biology of sleep timing changes as we age, and as puberty begins, teens' sleep clocks get pushed back. Most adults start oozing melatonin around 10 p.m.-ish, but one study showed that teenagers don't start producing melatonin until closer to 1 a.m. This may be because puberty's hormonal frenzy is stalling the release of melatonin, and could partly explain why so many teens stay up late, energized by the night, but have a really hard time rolling out of bed with the alarm. Of course, it's a bit of a chicken and egg deal, since watching reruns of The Simpsons and playing Call of Duty late into the night continues to stimulate the brain, which may further delay the release of melatonin. Still, some researchers are starting to advocate for pushing back high school start times in the morning in the hopes of having more focused students. So we got sex hormones changing the bodies and a lack of sleep to contend with, but increasing evidence suggests that there is something much bigger at work that's making teenagers so teenagery. Their brains. It turns out that brains actually take longer than inside the brain. Adults for the most part, know how to make decisions by evaluating choices and weighing consequences. They do this with their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for controlling impulses and emotions and forming judgments. Its neurons chat with the neurons in other regions of the brain responsible for, say, memory or movement through synapses. Thing is, teenage brains don't quite work like this yet. The prefrontal cortex may not be fully developed until your mid-20s, and teen synapses, those lines of communication, are still growing and specializing. They're also slow. As an adolescent brain keeps developing, its axons, the long tail-like parts of the neurons that transmit signals to other neurons, become more and more insulated by a fatty layer called the myelin sheath. This padding greatly increases the cell's transmission speed, and while it helps adults make faster decisions, it isn't fully formed in teens. These changes occur slowly, beginning at the back of the brain where the oldest and most fundamental brain parts reside, and slowly working its way forward to the more advanced and complicated brain bits. The prefrontal cortex is the last to be hooked up and shaped. So it's important to keep in mind that just because your favorite teenagers stayed up until sunrise binge-watching The Walking Dead the night before an exam, it doesn't mean they're dumb or lazy. Their brains are just literally finishing being built. But at the same time, because all this brain building is just starting to peak, this is also when the brain starts getting thinned out. You actually start losing connections that you don't use enough in a process called synaptic pruning, which has led to a theory that this is kind of a use it or lose it phase. Meaning, adolescence could be an especially important time to use your brain. Play an instrument, engage in sports, write poetry, learn a language. Because by doing these things, you're helping hardwire those synapses and giving your brain topiary a lovely, lasting shape. Whereas if you're sitting around all day playing Candy Crush, those will be the connections that survive, which you don't need. This shaping of the teen brain manifests itself in other ways too, like in teenage attitudes. A group of scientists at the McLean Hospital in Massachusetts once hooked up a group of adults and a group of teens to MRI devices and then asked them to identify a series of expressions on photographs of adult faces. Interestingly, while adults correctly identified one expression as fear, the teenagers thought the faces showed anger, surprise, or shock. They weren't registering subtlety as well. Not only that, but the MRI images showed that adults and teens responded with different parts of their brains. Adults used the reasonable prefrontal cortex, while the teens mostly used the gut reaction emotional amygdala, located farther back in the brain. Results like these might help explain why teenagers seem to experience frequent mood swings. For one, they tend to react quickly from the emotional part of their brain without running those reactions by the more rational frontal cortex, and two, it could be that they're just misreading expressions and therefore the intentions behind them. The frontal cortex also helps people relate to and understand each other, and you can imagine what happens when concern is misjudged as anger or worry as disappointment. The Fresh Prince has an entire song about it. But the truth is, as much as parents just don't understand, teens don't always understand either. When the emotional amygdala and the more rational cortex aren't fully hooked up yet, that can make it hard for teenagers to productively work through emotions. This kind of reactionary, impulsive behavior may also lead to more risk-taking. Adolescence is the time when we're most likely to experiment with whatever booze, drugs, or toad licking is available, and unfortunately, it's also the time our developing brains are most vulnerable to lasting effects. Studies have shown that teens are more likely to become addicted to drugs and alcohol than adults, partly because their brains are more attuned to their reward centers. While the teenage prefrontal cortex is still developing, their nucleus accumbens, or pleasure and reward zone, forms early on. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when presented with a big potential reward, teen brains light up way more than kids' or adults' brains. But if the reward was small, teen brains hardly fired at all. So basically, give an adolescent a pat on the back and you'll get a shrug. Give them a hot date or a winning goal and their brains light up like Vegas. This, of course, does not always result in great judgment. A jacked up, thrill-seeking impulse combined with an exquisite pang of peer pressure, plus a new driver's license, new sex parts, and access to substances can lead to some not good results. But still, this long and sometimes tedious remodeling process that our bodies go through in the teenage years isn't all bad. Many scientists have pointed out that our delayed adolescence lets our brains keep their flexibility longer, which, yeah, may make teens a little slow, but also more adaptable as they prepare for the adult world. In this way, you can see teen impulsiveness as boldness or independent thinking, and moodiness as a source of newfound empathy, and excitability as passion. Which means there's a lot of awesome energy floating around out there ready to decrease all kinds of world suck. Thanks for watching this SciShow Infusion, and thanks especially to all of our subscribers.
You don't need to take a nap after that? Really fast, a lot of information. But some of the basics are the limbic region and the right brain are kind of driving the ship. during the teen years. A lot of heat, a lot of activity. And what fires together wires together. So all the connections that we are able to make, especially with our teens, can really help all throughout the lifespan. If this is interesting to you, this stuff about the teen brain, I want to really plug a book called Brainstorm by Dan Siegel. I've listed on your handouts there kind of the myths and realities of adolescence based on the brain research that he's done. So if that's interesting to you, I would. His book is linked on the website, so check it out. And but also think about the power of what you say to your teens. And if we're looking at it in terms of, they're lazy, apathetic, reckless, rebellious, that's going to come out in our attitudes, in our interactions. But if we can take that place of insight and recognize, boy, this stuff comes from somewhere. This is really, there's some real brain architecture stuff that can explain this. We can do maybe better with that. So there's an activity. If you have teens, I would encourage you to do this, just about how we talk about our kids. And instead of saying these negative words, are there some different ways we can look at it? All right, so to wrap up, we're going to look really quickly at a few interventions, things that we can do to promote better actions for our kiddos based on what we know about the brain and about attachment. So the best interventions start with a calm parent. So getting yourself to your green zone, getting your lid back down, getting yourself to a place of calm, regulation, understanding. Do this curiosity thing. Explore. Look at what's going on with some answers and some understanding. There may be some brain development. Maybe it's executive functioning stuff. Maybe it's teen brain stuff. But I've got some ideas as to what might be going on there. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that what's going on may be normative developmental behavior, may not just be an effort to ruin your day. So exercise curiosity, exercise empathy, then move into action. The first one, and these come from Dan Siegel's books as well. This one he calls the connect and redirect strategy. So this is when you recognize a right brain, left brain difference that's happening. If you recognize that your child is fully in their right brain, they're stuck in that emotional land, they may not even have words to express what's going on. If we try to intervene from our left brain, how is that going to go? If we're coming at them with logic and with language, with lots of consequences, and we're giving this great big lecture, and they're stuck over in their right brain, they're probably not even processing it. All those great lectures that we give may not even be sinking in, because what needs to happen is we first have to connect, then we redirect. So recognize what's going on. If you see the emotion, see the feeling, call it out, recognize it. Connect to that right brain. You feel so left out right now. You look so sad. Or even, my goodness, you look really angry with me. Or even sometimes, gosh, I'm not even sure this is the best time for us to even be talking about this. It looks like we're both so upset. I don't even know that this is going to get us in a good space right now. Recognizing it. Call it out. Connect. When they feel felt, and when they feel heard and understood, you're soothing that right brain, and then they're able to take a trip over to their left brain after the right brain is felt. So connect, then redirect. And it's still not okay to hurt your sister. Once we connect, then we can come at it with our language, we can come at it with our logic, we can give those interventions, but starting from that place of connection rather than going at it from a place of I'm going to give you all the law and the consequences might get you more bang for your buck, might get you more for your effort. Start with connection, then move to redirection. The next one is I love this one too. These are also catchy. Engage, don't enrage. This is where you recognize a flipped lid. First step, don't meet them with another flipped lid, right? Do your calming, do your grounding, go to that place of curiosity with yourself, with your child, get yourself regulated, and meet them with calm. This is what we talked about several weeks ago, that idea of co-regulation. They actually borrow your calm. When you come into the situation, their lid is flipped. If you are calm, they borrow that calm, and that helps them be able to get their lid to come back down as well. When they feel really heard and really understood and non-threatened, when you're sending the message to them, look, I'm not a threat. It's not us and them, me against you. It's, hey, we are in this together, and I'm here for you. I'm here to help you through this. Then you're taking the threat out of the situation. And their lid comes back down because they feel heard and they feel safe. What they need is safety. They need to feel safe in that moment. So some things you might do to engage instead of enrage are things like get at or below the child's eye level, especially if they're little ones. They're used to seeing people looking down on them all of the time. And if you're a big adult who might be having some feelings, coming down on their level kind of evens the score. It kind of lets them know, hey, I'm here. I'm not going to lunge or attack you. I'm in a safe, vulnerable sort of position. Even showing you that your hands are open and not clenched lets them know that your nervous system is doing what it's supposed to do. You're calm, you're relaxed. Use body language to communicate, connect with emotions, hear their story. And if they can handle it, giving them some eye contact could be great. If they're a kid that can't handle eye contact, don't try to force it. You got to know your kid. You got to know if they can handle it or if they can't. If they can handle it, we were looking at some new research that they're finding on what eye contact actually does when you give kids your eyes. And when they give you their eyes, you get a burst of oxytocin, which is that connection and attachment hormone. And you get a burst of dopamine, that I feel good brain chemical, and you actually get some endorphins, those internal morphines, those painkillers. So giving eye contact actually helps bring the situation into a good, safe space. So hear their story. Listen to their side. Listening, when you feel heard and you feel like someone is listening to you, it feels good, doesn't it? You've probably been with someone who really gets you, really understands you, and you're telling them your situation or your side of the story, and they really hear you. What's happening in the brain is it actually releases this neurotransmitter called GABA, which GABA's whole job is to calm the downstairs brain and allow the lid to come back down. So you're going to be able to actually get more communication from your kids if you come at them from a place of calm rather than coming at them from a place of being enraged. Enraged is like pouring gasoline on the fire. Engaged is, I'm here, I'm safe, we can get through this. Name it to tame it is another one that you can use. And this is when kids are feeling so out of control, so upset, so frustrated, and they've lost their verbal ability because their brain is so hot. Maybe it's a flipped lid and they're down in their downstairs brain. You might need to do some narration for them. You might need to let them know what's going on. It helps connect to the emotional experience, gives them some language and some logic for what's going on. And can help with that. Getting good sleep, I would say, is an intervention for developing children as well. I've listed on your handouts some research from the UCLA sleep study, and so those are some things. And it's actually the research is pretty phenomenal. They look at the symptoms of mood disorders and ADHD, and they look at the symptoms of sleep deprivation, and they find that they're remarkably similar. So not getting enough sleep can look like a mood disorder, can look like an ADHD. So just getting some good sleep. There's listed on your handout some strategies, some things you can do to actually promote good sleep in your kiddos. So we're going to fix this last one for this kiddo, and then we're going to wrap it up tonight. Our kiddo that dropped his ice cream, what did this kid need in that moment? What was he begging for the whole time he was at the park? Attention. Those were serves, weren't they? We've got an explanation. When he was saying, hey, look at me, hey, look at me, hey, look at me, what he needed was connection, that serve and return. Then he fell and he dropped his ice cream and he's undone. He's wailing, he's crying. What strategy could we use to help him in that moment? What do you think? More ice cream? Maybe. What about just a name it to tame it? Look, kiddo, when this happened, looks like things didn't go the way that you thought that they would, and now you're feeling really disappointed. You had the coolest ice cream, and you dropped it, and you feel so sad. You feel disappointed. We're naming it for them. We're letting them know that thing that you're feeling right now is called disappointment. This is what happens when unexpected and sad things happen, and what you're communicating is that you understand what's going on in his world. So we've got some tools. I'd challenge you to think about the other two kids in the stories. We'll start off next week looking at the other two kiddos, the one with the screen time and then looking at Mike. But for little Timmy, he just needed some serve and return. He needed some name it to tame it. Even name it to tame it is a form of serve and return. I see what happened, and I'm going to connect to you on this emotional level. So there's some tips to think about over the next week as well. Those are listed on your handouts also. Thanks so much for your attention. Look for this stuff. Look for some moments to do some name it to tame it, some serve and return. Look at some ways to engage, not enrage. And I'd love to hear some examples sometimes when you guys are trying this. So have a great week. Do lots and lots of serve and return, and I will see you next week. Thanks a lot, folks.